All right, and good morning, everyone. Good afternoon to people in other time zones. Welcome to the Living in Oneness Summit. We have over 15,000 people registered so far, and our registration is still climbing. I'm Steve Farrell, the Worldwide Coordinating Director for Humanities Team and one of your hosts during the summit. Today is day 4 of the summit. We have an amazing day in store. Please get comfortable. We are broadcasting live each day with at least 2 programs and talking about how we can come fully alive as part of the divine. Many people share that's not where they're living now, and so if that's you, you're in the right place, because our whole message is about renewing and restoring our connection with God and each other. Now I'd like to warmly welcome our special guest for the hour. You are going to love him and his work. James O.D. is an award-winning author of Cultivating Peace. He is lead faculty for the Shift Network acclaimed Global Peace Ambassador Training. He has conducted frontline social healing dialogues around the world for many years. He is the former president of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, the Washington officer director of Amnesty International, and CEO of the Seva Foundation. He is a member of the Evolutionary Leaders group and is on several advisory boards, such as the Peace Alliance and Kosmos Journal. His next book, The Conscious Activist, will be available in December 2014. We also want to share that James is a friend who lives here in Colorado and is someone who I believe embodies oneness. You can hear it when he speaks. And welcome to the program, James. It's so great to have you here with us this morning.
Well, thank you, Steve, and what a pleasure to be back with you and for this global connection that you're making around this profoundly important theme of oneness.
Well, thank you. I think people probably heard our conversation here before we formally started, and we were just sharing that this awakening, this conscious evolution, this shift is happening, and all of us were invited here, I think Humanities Team, to create this Living in Oneness Summit, and James O.D., who's such an incredible teacher and author and speaker on oneness, and each of us that's here listening today on this beautiful Mother's Day weekend. By the way, today is Mother's Day in Mexico, so happy Mother's Day to all of you in Mexico who are listening in, and shoot, happy Mother's Day to everybody around the world. Mothers are truly extraordinary examples of oneness, are they not? Because oneness is about unconditional love and unconditional forgiveness, and don't mothers embody that in a beautiful way? And James, I'll even direct that to you.
Yes, indeed, and I would say that my mother was one of my great spiritual teachers. You know, she used to say to me when I was a child this mantra that she repeated often, and it went like this: remember, son, you are as great as any person who ever walked the face of earth. That's a great thing to say to a little boy. And then she'd say, and you are no better than the man who takes away your trash. So there was the oneness in her teaching there. You're as great as anyone. Rise to your greatness. And you're no better than any other person on the face of the earth either. And that was her teaching. And that was so empowering to me. It really gave me the strength and energy to take the human rights cause and speak with presidents of the world and world leaders about these matters, because I had that inner teaching of oneness.
My gosh, wow! I'm so glad we started with this Mother's Day message, and which then invited you in to share that, James. I can imagine growing up to have a mother affirm you that way with something that is such a noble statement. You clearly had this all roll out in front of you in a way that really sets you up to be the person you are today, huh?
Indeed.
James, I thought, of course, there's so many things that we can talk about from your professional roles, all of the things that you've done, the books that you've written, the courses that you create today. We're going to talk about all of those things. Before we do, I thought we could just stay on the subject of oneness on a very personal level because, again, in your voice and in your manner, in your body expression, you can feel oneness. And I'm just curious as to what your own personal processes are and oneness. What are the kinds of things that you do during the day that help you stay connected with the divine?
Well, I've chosen to live in Crestone, Colorado for a particular reason, in that I think when we reach a certain point, we say to ourselves, how can I live my values? How can I embody what I believe? And my core beliefs are around the sacredness of the earth and the sacredness of all life on earth and our deep responsibility at this time in human history to experience our participation in nature as part of that oneness story. And so Crestone is a small place in the foothills of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. It attracts people who are also interested in a less fast-paced life in terms of rushing around, still doing a lot, and serving the world. But it has a keen interest in spirituality. Thousands of acres of land were given to the world's spiritual traditions. So there's Christian Carmelite monastery, Hindu ashram, Zen temple, Japanese Shumei Institute, many, many forms of spirituality. And then there's deep community here. So those three legs of the stool, ecology, spirituality, and community, are a way of then embodying that unity, of taking care of each other, of taking care of our relationship with nature, and of taking care of that primary responsibility to incarnate the spiritual part of our nature.
Beautiful. I hope to get down there to Crestone. You're not that far away. I'm here in Boulder, and the other humanities team leaders here with me are also in Boulder, one in Fort Collins and one not too far from Jamestown. But it sure sounds appealing, and I've learned a little bit more about it even than I knew before. James, one of the themes that's coming up, of course, over and over as we're asking people about this aspect of connecting with the divine is nature. Being out in nature and just really connecting in an extraordinary way with the divine. And, of course, this brings in some of the things, ecology and so on, too. Can we talk just a little bit more about that, what that feeling is for you, and maybe bring in, I know there are people, your mother you mentioned, but others that have really impacted you as you've grown in oneness. We could maybe bring that in as well.
Yes, certainly we have abstracted ourselves from nature. We've made ourselves something other. And yet, if you look at even the marvelous science these days, we share 50% of our DNA with a banana. The book of life itself is written with 4 letters from the DNA code. The DNA code comprises of 4 letters, and in all of the variations of those 4 letters, we have everything that's living on the planet. So we share the same DNA. We come from the same mother. We come from the same root. We are on a journey together in nature. And so that participation with nature, to see our kinship with nature, is not to fall back into an earlier phase of our development. It's to honor the great structure and code of the universe itself, the great field of existence. And part of our task at the moment is to see that we have inflicted a wound into nature, and that nature's wound in climate disruption and pollution and deforestation and so on is a reflection of our wound. So the divine holds up a mirror and says, look at yourself. Look at where your self-obsession, your greed, your ignorance is taking you. And so, as nature can reflect our wound, it can reflect our healing. It can reflect that interdependence of life, that co-creativity, that song of life that's written in the DNA itself. So, it's been very healing for me to commune with nature. You know, this word commune, just as in Catholic communion, has that sense of sharing. It means to share with another. And truly we can commune with nature. And there's that greater order of divinity can literally speak to us through the blades of grass. All of the poets and mystics show us how when we attune, when we start to commune inside nature as a part of it, it wakes up with healing messages for us. And this word healing has at its root wholeness. And so nature in itself is also a paradigm of wholeness, of winter and summer, of seasonal change, of deep diversity. And it shows you the exquisite, absolutely exquisite diversity that is held in the oneness. That oneness is not a collapse of identity into sameness, into boring marketing of the same old story. It's always unique, diverse, every bird, every tree. There was a wonderful English poet, Gerard Manley Hopkins, who had this practice that he called inscaping. He said, God is so marvelously creative that God never repeats herself, never at all. There's nothing that's repeated. And so he would look at trees of the same species and find the uniqueness of each tree, each branch, each leaf, as a way of contemplating this expressiveness in this universe, the diversity and creativity. And it's one of the things that we're called to protect at the moment, biodiversity, and learn from how nature consecrates diversity, creates life through diversity, but holds it all in oneness.
Boy, let's just breathe into that for a minute. James, there's so many beautiful things that you just shared, and you can just feel you streaming right now with the divine, just bringing it straight through, and so many profound and beautiful things that you shared just about communing with nature and biodiversity and joining our consciousness with nature, etc. Just truly stunning. And I know I'm speaking for listeners and sharing you. This is, we're in oneness where we're in this place, in this sacred place. So beautiful. I want to share a comment here that came in as well. This is from Todd in Evergreen, Colorado. He says, thank you for your Peace Ambassador course. I'm really finding it amazing, and I feel it is a must course for veterans returning from combat. Much love to you, brother.
Mm-hmm. Well, in that conversation with nature, when we get into it in terms of that wounding, that nature is so forgiving in some ways. When we cease our polluting activity, when we cease our invasive superiority, higher than thou attitude to other forms of life, they come back, they restore, they heal. It may take a long time, but there's that sense that whatever the level of wounding that we experience, nature reminds us that we can heal. And this is a time, of great potential healing on the planet.
Yes, it is. And when we talk about shift and this new collective consciousness and individual consciousness, that's what it is all about, isn't it? It's about healing and communing and connecting. And
you were asking me about, those who have inspired me on the way, and because my journey has taken me into such deep wounding, into massacres in Lebanon, 10 years, dealing with torture, abuse, and human rights violations in Amnesty International and so on. Some of my greatest teachers have been those who have been so profoundly hurt and wounded by other forms of human ignorance and cruelty, and yet who remind us that really the greatest tragedies can be overcome. I think of the Shahak family in Israel, whom I met when I was last in Israel, and their teenage daughter was blown up with other teenagers in a terrorist bombing, and they were not involved in peace work at all. They were a somewhat conservative family. When eventually they were clearing out their daughter's room, they found under her bed her diary, and flicking through their diary, the last entry in the diary said, "I dream of peace with the Palestinians." And they were so moved that they didn't know that their daughter treasured this dream, and that even in the unbearable pain of having your daughter bombed and killed in that way, they reached out to Palestinian families who also had people killed in the conflict. And they started an organization of bereaved families saying, if you're in as much pain as we are in, let's join together. So my story, as you know, Steve, is one of seeing the unity and the oneness recovered at the deepest and most profound levels of human suffering. And to be a voice for that, to say, if that is happening and that is possible, let's get on with it. We can do it. If our way showers show us the way, really through hell itself, the divisiveness, the hatred, the polarization, and say that they have gone through that and recaptured, rediscovered, and called forth the oneness. What is not possible in human endeavor?
Yes, well, we're grateful that you got the call and then that you consecrated yourself to this journey, answering the call, because your work is so powerful and impacts so many. James, let's again, there's so much to step through, because I want to get through one of the themes of the summit is coming fully alive ourselves as a part of the divine, but also in our relationship with our significant other and our family life at work. And as a leader, we'll get to that at the end of the call. But let's go straight into your Peace Ambassador course that Todd in Evergreen, Colorado referenced, because I know you provide so many tools for not only personal healing, but social healing. So can you just tell us a little bit about this course?
Yes, there are basically 4 pillars to the course, and they are about discovering and working on the inner life of peace, and then looking at that whole paradigm of wounding and healing and recovery and restoration and forgiveness. And then the 3rd pillar is all of the body of communication skills, this massive new amount of skillfulness that we can employ in nonviolent communication, in dialogue, in what I call energy mastery, and we can talk a little bit more about that. And then the 4th pillar is systems thinking, and really then it concludes with the 5th pillar, which is how then shall we act? How can we live this? How can we take it into our lives? So it's really a training that goes from the inner to the international. It shows us that, from the personal all the way to the systemic, the transformation is happening, is possible, can be aligned with, and can be learned. And that the old paradigm of peace as an oppositional force, of course we have to oppose certain kinds of war and torture and human rights violations. But that we have moved into this new era, Steve, where we really are talking about a culture of peace. We're talking about that deep inspiration that is so necessary to catalyze our own deepest contribution. And so that we begin in that inner core of awakening that sense of inner peace and inspiration. Because it's there that the soul's code resides. It's there where our deepest life purpose exists. And that exploration of, where are your core qualities, and that fundamental understanding that you are true, that you are not, you may have experienced trauma and deep suffering, but you are not a broken being. You are, the deeper you go, the more you discover your wholeness and your power and your essential identity. I was listening to a conversation the other day. It reminded me of Mozart's expression. Mozart, this wonderfully inspired composer who says, "From whence this music comes, I do not know, but I thank the good Lord that it's Mozartish." And so he hears and he receives this music from the cosmos, and he recognizes it as a reflection of his essence, as an expression of his essence. And that's the whole story in one fundamental sense, isn't it? It's that our essence is true. It's a reflection of the reality. I was also asked to help teach some yoga teachers the other day. There were 15 yoga teachers in Crestone, and they asked me to do a 4-hour teaching and sharing with them. And they asked me a question: how do you recognize the level of realization and development of a student? I thought, well, that's an interesting question. And I said, I recognize it through the level of humility of the student. And they all nodded like, oh, that's wise. And I said, but let me tell you about Meher Baba and his perspective on this. He says, modesty is the game of ego. Modesty is about how much shall I show, how much do I think people can take, when am I supposed to step back, when am I supposed to not have my ego protrude. That's all modesty is about, ego games. He said, but humility is to stand in the power of who you are, to reveal your essence, to let your truth shine forth, to let your essential nature be revealed to others, to have the humility to get out of the way and to let that being radiate through. That's humility. And so to the extent that you're in the presence of somebody who's really learned how to get out of the way, stop playing those ego manipulation games, and truly express the core essence of their identity, that's what's going to make peace on earth. That level of humility that says, here I am, use me, activate me, work with me. And it's a belief in one's own inner core, because that core is one with the cosmos, with the divine source. So we have a paradigm, a cosmological paradigm, a spiritual paradigm, a psychological paradigm, a scientific paradigm, a political paradigm for peace. They're all, it's like if you're sitting in the catbird seat I sit in, you can see this in time of incredible convergence when these streams are coming together and enabling peace. And of course, that doesn't mean we turn away from reality and live in a la-la land and say, everything's just so beautiful and so wonderful. Well, what we need to do is to be able to face what suffering is caused by human ignorance and really know that, not turn away from it. You may have heard me say before, part of my core teaching, let the bitter be bitter and let the sweet be sweet until the bitter and the sweet are one. Don't turn away from the pain, because you, my friends, are the transformers. Your task in the energy conversation, which we may get into here, is to transform the ignorance, to transform the hatred, to transform the suffering. You can only do that when you look at it and know deeply its nature, its quality of distortion and manipulation. But take that then and put your energy into the solution.
So beautiful and profound, James. My gosh. You shared, maybe we'll get into the energy conversation. One of the things as you were sharing a little earlier, you were saying the deeper we go, the more we discover our wholeness and power. And I suspect a lot of people would like to understand that better. Maybe this is the energy discussion. What you mentioned that there's quite a journey here. It starts with the inner and then goes to the outer. You used a lot of words to describe it, kind of personal process to the collective process. And on the personal process end, where we're going deeper, what are some of the kinds of exercises that you recommend in your courses?
Well, one of the things that I've become really intrigued by is the journey of energy in the universe itself. I mean, we now are beginning to, just as we have that map of the DNA and we say 4 letters of the DNA, this basic code of the DNA structures all living things. Wow! The book of life is written with 4 letters. So also we're beginning to see that all energy in the universe is sourced from a primal source, if you like, the mother field of energy. For those interested, you can track some of it in some of my writing and in more scientifically in Ervin Laszlo's work. But we have energy which is connected all over the universe. So in terms of looking at our oneness, we are one energetically at the level of, subatomic energy. All energy is interfused and interconnected and inseparably linked to every other form of energy in the universe. We've got to get that map clear that says, the energy that arises in the universe does not have separative existence at the subatomic level. So our source energy, just even without getting into theology, just bare science here, is one. And then we look at the interaction of energy and consciousness, and we begin to map what happens in the journey of energy, that our way of expressing preference or our way of expressing antipathy moves the energy. It repels it or it embraces it. It gets stuck. And what we do in the peace work is go into that place where the energy is stuck in certain forms in the consciousness. And we are, as peace ambassadors, as spiritual workers, there we are, if you like, working on the aikido of how to move around, energy that comes at you aggressively and in a distorted way, how to empathically help open up blocked energy in others. I mean, aikido, Steve, is an amazing word. It comes from Morihei Uesugi, who created aikido, who believed totally in the oneness of humanity and world peace. I means in connection with, in communion with. Ki means Shakti, Chi, spirit, the energy of the universe. Do means the way of connecting with the essential oneness of the energy of the universe. So that's what we start to help teach in practical ways. What happens when the intellectual bully comes at you and starts, using their intellect to make you inferior? How do you work around that energy? And there are different energy styles that people have. One I call the bouncer. The bouncer is, anything that comes at the bouncer that is difficult, that's going to be emotionally challenging. What they do with their energy? They bounce it back at you at twice the velocity it came. And how do you respond to that? How do you work with that? Energy bouncers, blockers, zappers. There are many ways of processing energy. So we get right in there so that we can both protect ourselves, which is important, then do the work of healing, because Aikido's principle is you have a fundamental right to protect yourself and a responsibility to do so. And then secondly, you must protect the other person from themselves. Wow. There's a job with your energy work, with your energy mastery, is to protect yourself and then help protect the other person from their own misuse of energy. So it's really, I write about it in Cultivating Peace. There's a whole chapter on energy mastery. It's really part of the new spiritual dimension of our evolution, that we can see how energy works and we can address it more skillfully in the protection of ourselves and others.
And this is such a tangible thing that we're talking about here, where we're this Aikido process you described, where we're empathically helping others, and you mentioned not only helping others, obviously helping ourselves and helping others. But one of the things you share about your course is that, and I think you explained part of this, but it might be worth going just a little deeper in. And you say that you can you help people to stand in the fire of opposing views and feel whole. Stand in the fire of opposing views and feel whole. And it just strikes me that in today's world, where there's so much coming up, because that's what this shift is causing, is the polarity that we see of politics here in the U.S. and all of these other challenges that we're dealing with, that is a critical skill, to feel whole, even as you're standing in the power, fire, and force of opposing views. And I'm guessing that there are many ways that you share with those that you work with to do that, because you mentioned one process that that people could use that you called bouncer. But for our listeners, are there could you talk about that a little bit? I suspect that would be a valuable spiritual tool.
Right. Well, it's really about that particular skill set is about cultivating the witness. So let's just get some terms clear for a moment. In any given conflict situation, you could say there's the protagonist, there's the event, there's the trauma or the incident that's been created. There can be the spectator, the onlooker, the observer. The observer is one who's thinks that they are removed from the situation and are investigating it or onlooking it or observing its qualities. And then there is the witness. And the witness is particularly interesting because the witness is not like the observer or the spectator. The witness is with what happens, but not a part of it. Just as Jesus and the prophets talk about that state of being that you can be with something, but not of it. That's a very subtle spiritual development, but it's one we're reaching into and seeing the powerful peace dimension of. So I was having a conversation about this recently. Let's imagine that some traumatic event in your early life created a sense of humiliation. It was shamed, it was humiliation, and it was traumatic, and you carried that energy. When events in the outer world remind you of that, or you're faced with elements of it, you trigger. You go back into the energy, the experience of the humiliation. In fact, scientists will tell you, you recreate the biochemistry of humiliation in your blood. You recreate the electromagnetic field of the time. Your whole memory system reactivates. Your face goes red, whatever it is. And so once you get triggered, you're back in that state. So we work on that concept of cultivating the witness. The witness says, I know I'm with you, but I'm not triggered. I'm deeply connected to it. So the witness, what the witness does is sees the quality of something. So here's the teaching, Steve. When the witness uses its consciousness to say, this is the nature of humiliation. I see it now. I see the whole quality of what happens when I get humiliated. Wow. Something, we call it a knowledge event. Something happens in the consciousness. It's like learning to ride a bicycle. The next time you come back to that, you're less triggered. It doesn't pull you right back into the vortex of that feeling and you become angry or humiliated or whatever the trigger is. And so cultivating the witness is a very subtle process that says, in peacemaking, it's so invaluable because what it says is, when you come to that triggering moment and you're with someone, you can say to them, yes, I'm with you, I understand. I was once humiliated. I really understand what it's like to be humiliated. You're not speaking out of your triggers and your explosions and your rage and your hurt. You're speaking out of knowledge. You've moved into the place of knowledge because you've understood the nature. You've used consciousness to understand the nature and the qualities, the way to know your own inner life. That is huge. I mean, if we just helped humanity work with cultivating the inner witness, we would stop so much reactivity. And so often, what happens in conflicts is not malevolence, it's not intentional desire to hurt. So often, it is that people get triggered, and they get triggered by their beliefs, by their traumas, by their experience. And they find themselves, before they know it, in the middle of those fires of rage, those fires of hostility. Now we're saying there is a practice, there are ways to be able to stand in the fires of hostility, but not be triggered, to be, in fact, the voice of reconciliation, the voice of understanding, the voice of knowledge, of deeper knowledge. Because once we know the nature of qualities, we move through knowledge in a different way. It's as if they lose their hold over us. Very powerful stuff,
Yes, it is. Oh, I'm so glad we went deeper into this. What a And I know this is just one dimension of your Peace Ambassador training, but a really key dimension. So I'm so glad we went into it. One of the listeners, Cassandra in Tulsa, Oklahoma, wanted to go back. You said earlier, let the bitter be bitter and the sweet be sweet until they come together. And she wanted to just understand that, some of the process behind that.
Yes, in that sense, what I try to teach is, don't look away from the pain. Don't make pain an autonomous object that then gets pushed around in your psyche and gets repressed, and you've got a relationship with the painful, the bitter, that says, I've got to avoid you at all costs, or I've got to push you back, push you down because you're too bitter and I hate that bitterness. It's actually, the process there is to accept that it's bitter and to allow, again, it's that nature. What is its nature? This is painful and bitter. So you allow the pain body and the bitterness to be felt, and once it meets that consciousness, once you allow it, it starts to refine, it starts to move upward, which is the secret mystery of energy in the universe. It's on a journey from gross to subtle. The whole every major spiritual tradition teaches us that, the journey is one from gross to subtle, and we are energy refiners. And the way we refine the bitter is by allowing it to be, and then it expresses its nature and its hurt. We don't kind of do the Pollyanna sweet cover, I'm not supposed to show my anger, I'm not supposed to show my pain, I'm not supposed to let people know how bitter it is. You can do this. It sounds maybe antithetical to what you think, but once it's like speaking the truth. You cannot have peace on earth if the truth is not spoken. There is a way to speak the truth that isn't in attack mode, but that is definitely revealing of the hurt that was felt, of the pain that was felt. And once that energy is liberated in that way, it moves up. It starts to move more into compassion. And the same for the sweet. We don't try to make our lives constructed around the sweet, so everything is sweet. I'm only going to do the things that make my life sweet and pleasant, and I'm going to avoid the things that are painful. It's this allowance that consciousness has the capacity to. And what that leads us to is away from the polarity of sinner and saint, of victim and perpetrator and so on, all those polarities. And it starts to work its way through to what some traditions call being in the present, others call non-duality, others call being one with the heart. I deal with some of this in more depth in my next book, The Conscious Activist, where activism meets mysticism, which is being released on International Human Rights Day, which is December 10th of this year.
Fantastic. Well, we'll look for that book for sure, James. There are comments coming in. I'll just share one, and then we'll go into this aspect of oneness and other parts of our life. There's somebody writing a book about sacred science, and she just says, thank you for speaking of the journey of energy, which leads us both through the sacred and scientific truth. So a lot of appreciation, James, for the important ground you're covering. James, one of the things you shared with me over the last year was this process that sounded like oneness to me, where when you and your wife separated, you had the kids stay in one home, and then you both just took turns coming into the home. It just sounded like such a loving, beautiful way to raise kids, even where our lives diverge and we go in different directions. Can you talk a little bit about that and just oneness and raising a family? Because I suspect there are many things you could share about oneness as a father, as a parent.
Yes, thank you for raising that, because, in the book, The Conscious Activist, I say, the closest in we get as activists is on the domestic front. How do we express gender equality? How do we express, emotional, empathic connection and fairness and equity? And how does it all play out? It all plays out there on the home front. And then something like, separation comes, where, it's a word that can strike terror in our hearts. It feels like, the pulling apart, the wrenching apart of lives. I say in the book, at the moment when we talked about separation, which is after 21 years of marriage with 3 children, I said, I had this image that I knew that trees scream when they're pulled from the earth. Trees scream when they're pulled from the earth. And if you can imagine a marriage of 21 years full of intense love and devotion and connection, there was that screaming, that pulling apart going on inside. And yet, in the midst of all of that pulling apart, which happened, we can't go back and make it not happen. And it happens in our lives. These separations, these traumatic events, whatever they are. But we continued to function as an organism that was rooted in love, because that was the source of everything that went on in that household. And so we said to the children, we're not going to pull you apart. You're going to be the new nucleus here. You're going to be the center, and your parents are going to come. Half the week Dad will be here, half the week Mom will be here, and we'll rotate around you. And what happened was we all found ourselves in that way. We found the expression of our unity together, of our service to each other, of our connection to each other. And actually, the 3 boys really bonded more deeply, and it empowered them. They saw their role in the wholeness of the family, a connection of unity that could not be broken apart by things like separation and divorce and moving out of relationships in a certain context. It was such a powerful sense for me that the deeper unity, the deeper power of love can unfold in very mysterious ways, revealing our connection to each other. And so I think it reminds me of just my whole journey when I, work in social healing dialogues with former Nazis and Holocaust survivors, with Palestinians and Israelis, with Hutu and Tutsis, with Catholics and Protestants, that I've done for so many years over the world. And they rediscover, reconnect with each other, their unity. When people have been through conflict and deep separation, when they avow their human connection to each other, it tells us that we're in the depth story, we're in the real story. We're connecting with essence here, not something that is superficial. So I can really testify in my own family situation that even in the superficial and very painful breaking apart, there was a deeper level, the discovery of our, I would say, our eternal connection. How about that? Go smoke that pipe. The one you've separated from, you are eternally connected to. And when you know that, it brings great solace to the soul. Because it's one of the facets of the truth of the universe that you've actually discovered in the midst of your pain and suffering.
Yes, comes right back to the peace pipe here. I love it, an eternal connection. Let me just share, because we've got about 11 minutes left, we do have a hard stop right at the half hour. That's the thing about we do record these, and we've got the written transcripts and CDs and all these things. So there is a hard stop in 10 minutes. I'll just mention that to everybody. So beautiful, James. I just can't help but think as I'm listening to you that your boys are growing up in such incredible authenticity to be part of this, as you describe it, deeper unity, deeper power of love, this transparency. There's so many words I could use to describe what you did with your boys, but it just strikes me that you're really inviting them to be their true selves and authentic selves, and to strip off anything that's superficial. And for that matter, as as I hear you talk about your courses, it's really the same thing. You're going down into essence and inviting people, when you talked about bitter and sweet, etc., to really be there and feel it. Don't repress it. Don't what you resist persists. So don't repress it. Be who you are. And so I love it. It all is such an authentic process.
Yes, and the interesting thing with the children, too, was understanding that what happened somehow dissolved any sense of hierarchy. Not that we were a hierarchical family, but the sense that the children had a role in the healing. And they discovered that, in the early part of that process, it was, Kathleen saying, have you washed, do you have clean underwear, and do you have your lunch for tomorrow? And the boys would say, Mom, this is our time with Dad now. And sort of helping facilitate the whole process. So I think that's a remarkable achievement. I'm not saying that from a personal ego, but from the universe's creativity to say, when we re-empower each other so that the children are not the repositories, but they are the actual activators of the healing process, I think that's really, there's something there that's very key that breaks down, the old ancestral pattern of no matter how you do it, you're bearing with you the transmission of how you were parented in the past, and the relationship between parents and children, which can be loving, but there are hidden hierarchies or dominator models that we just constantly need to recheck and say, what's really going on here. Also, in The Conscious Activist, one of the things that I want to write more about is children and spirituality, because I had an intense spiritual connection as a child, and I sometimes look around me and I feel that children are not recognized for having deep, authentic spiritual experiences. It's as if we kind of have gotten too much into modern psychology and cognitive development. Yes, there are levels of cognitive development, but spirit precedes cognitive development. And I think if we invite and allow and nurture that spiritual life of children to be open, to be creative, they don't categorize. The categorization comes at the cognitive level. But I don't know if you relate to this, Steve, but to me it's an exciting area to really look at childhood spirituality and invite it and honor it in a way that says, this is not kid stuff. This is spirit, unconditioned spirit speaking through, that it's very, very important to invite in.
Yes, it is, and I do deeply resonate with that. I'm the father myself of two kids, one that's 9 and one that's 12, Dylan and Sophie, and absolutely, they are of course a part of the divine. And the beautiful thing about our kids is they're not conditioned when they're young to try and put a mask on, so they walk around as just really beautiful incarnations of the divine that they are. And they speak with honesty and with heart, and they'll also speak with their frustrations and anger and stress, and so yes, I deeply resonate with what you're talking about here, James. I want so many things to comment on. Oh my gosh, we've got 5 minutes though, so with a hard stop. But I want to just underscore one thing. You were mentioning how your sons became key parts of the healing process, and then you brought in, ways that were organized today in reference to dominator model, etc. One of the things that we're doing now year-round with Barbara Marx Hubbard with her Foundation for Conscious Evolution, Barbara Fields with the Association for Global New Thought, and then Anna Marie Patiers and myself with Humanities Team, we've got a collaboration where we do calls once each month on oneness in the 12 spheres of life, and it's based on Barbara Marx Hubbard's Wheel of Co-Creation. And each month we talk about, this month it was health. In fact, Deborah Rosman came in to talk about health. Next month it's governance, and Marianne Williamson will come in. And James, we're going to have to bring you into that discussion because there's so much you could add. But the reason I bring this up is we talk exactly about this, that these traditional roles that are here now have to change. And even when we talk about doctor and patient, when in the world of oneness, it's not this looking down, I know it all, I'm the doctor, and you don't know anything, you're the patient. No, oneness doesn't work that way. And you've been referencing that time and again as you've brought in your Peace Ambassador training, how everything shifts. And I don't need to ask you about your oneness and leadership, because you talked about it during the call when you brought in this discussion of humility versus modesty. What an incredible teaching that you brought in around leadership. It was beautiful. So
I think
yeah, go ahead, James.
One of the demanding aspects of emerging leadership and activism, and the joining of activism and spiritual life and mysticism, and we've sort of touched on it, but it's one in which we say, give your full awareness and attention to the suffering of the world, to the problems of the world, to the things that are not working, and give your fullest energy and creativity to the solutions that abound. And what happens is we have big homework here, folks, because we put too much energy into the problem. We put our PhDs into the problem. We talk about it. We saturate ourselves. I call it the entropy of the problem. The entropy of the problem sucks us into the problem. And so this is our homework assignment for this age, is to say, I give my full intellectual attention and awareness. I will understand deeply the corrosive corruption, wounding, hurt, whatever power plays, manipulations. I will understand them. I have to understand them. But I'm going to put my energy, my precious, precious energy into the solutions. And we live at a time when that convergence of science and spirituality and psychology and systems thinking, they are saturated with solutions for living conscious lives, sustainable lives, loving lives. The solution of our oneness is written in the great mirror of life written before us, showed to us by the divine. It can be, if we put our energy into it, if we enact it, if we incarnate it, if we allow the being itself to be liberated by the solution and not captured by the problem.
And I'll come in here, and what a beautiful last words I want to share. There's just been such a treasure chest here, treasure trove of things shared on this call, and want to invite you. There is this upgrade option where you can order the MP3s or the written transcripts, the CDs. It's if you go to the livinginone.com site, you'll